Welcome back to the Rebellion Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Staker. So I called my dad earlier today, and I was like, Dad, this is the first time I have ever not had any clue what the starting lineup will be for this Runnin Rebel basketball team. Like, we have such a unique balance of players. There's so many different combinations, and then I start naming all these players, and I'm like, you have the athletic young players, and then you have the polished veteran players who aren't as talented, and he's like, I don't even know any of these players' names, so I can't even have this conversation with you. I can't speculate when I don't even know who these players are. I'm like, Dad, you know who Naz Cunningham is? I've talked to you about him like 7 times. He's like, oh, I don't know. So like, that's why I started this podcast, because I don't have anyone to talk Rebel hoops with. The only people I can talk with, they just know a little bit. Like, you know what? Like they can just have the basic conversation of, and not really go much in depth. So this podcast allowed me to talk about this stuff, without looking like a weirdo talking to myself, because I'm, talking into a microphone. So, I'm excited to talk about today's topic, which is we have a new member to the Runnin Rebel men's basketball team, and his name is Walter Brown from New Zealand. This was a very random, late addition to this team that nobody saw coming. Nobody ever heard of this dude. His picture, if you look at his picture, it's hilarious. He looks like, I don't know if anyone remembers that old movie, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He looks like Spicoli, who's basically this stoner surfer guy. That's what this guy looks like. And you look at him and you hear New Zealand, you're like, oh, he's probably not that good. But we're going to dive deep into our new player, Walter Brown, today. I try to do as much homework as I can on him. There's just not a lot of information about him out there. There's not a lot of game film. There's some highlight tapes, which I've watched all of them. I've watched every second of every highlight I could find. And I think I put together a pretty solid analysis of this player. And on a scale of 1 to 10 of excitement, right, I would say 10 is like we just landed the number 1 high school player in the nation. And then 1 is like we just picked up somebody who's going to make our team worse. I would say I'm about a 6.5 to 7 for Walter Brown. I think this kid is going to be better than people think. Granted, I tend to be more on the optimistic side. People say I think every player is good. It's not the case, but I get why they would say that, because I'm always positive. But let's go ahead and jump into this, right? So Walter Brown, like I said, caught everyone by surprise, and he will be suiting up for the Scarlet and Gray this upcoming season. And so, all right. Well, first I'll go through his resume, and then we'll just go from there. If you are unfamiliar with Walter Brown, if you haven't done your homework on him, you're going to learn a lot about him in this episode. Okay, so he played professional basketball in New Zealand for the past, I believe, 5 years. So, I mean, that's an interesting conversation in itself. If you're asking yourself, how can he play professional basketball and then go to play college? How does that work? I'm going to talk about that too, because I had to do some homework myself. But he played for the Canterbury Rams for 5 years. That was his club. And he's considered to be a proven winner with a knack for making winning plays. Okay, so a guy who just knows how to win, plays better when the pressure's on, wants the ball in the most difficult, high-pressure situations. This apparently is that type of player, which who doesn't want to hear that, right? So he won 2 championships with the Canterbury Rams. That's pretty good. He was named the New Zealand National Basketball League Youth Player of the Year in 2023. I don't know what that means exactly, but that sounds pretty good to me, right? I mean, I don't know if that's like the equivalent of like the Gatorade Player of the Year in the United States for New Zealand, but still, I like to hear it, right? Okay, let's get into some of his stats. In 2024 for the Canterbury Rams, he averaged 9.4 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting 51.7% from the field and 42.2% from 3. Those are some pretty good stats. I don't know how many minutes he played. I don't have that information, but 51% from the field and 42% from 3 is very efficient. 2 assists, that's good. Okay, assists are, not a lot of players can average a lot of assists. They're not that easy, right? So 2 assists is pretty solid. 5.5 rebounds is also really solid. Love to have players that can rebound, okay? And so let's look in 2025. So he improved to 13.5 points per game, just under 6 rebounds per game, 2 assists, 48% from the field. And this is the only thing I see concerning about his stats is he dropped to 33.3% from three-point range. Now, 33% isn't a bad shooter, but it's not a good shooter either. It is, I would say, respectable, meaning you don't just let them shoot, right? You don't just leave them wide open. Especially because, I mean, I got to think he's a better shooter than 33.3%. I mean, he shot 42% the season before it. He drained a lot of threes in the videos that I've watched. He has really good looking form on his jump shot. So I'm not sure yet if we're getting a legit sniper or a guy who's just a decent three-point shooter. I guess we'll find out. I know he played less games in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. He only played 18 games, so that could have played a role in his shooting. You also don't know what else was going on. You know, he could have had an injury and it took time to come back from that. I don't know. But the 33% is the only thing that jumps out to me as like a little concerning. Other than that, these are some really good, efficient stats. Okay, it sounds like a kind of a guy who can pretty much do everything. 6 rebounds from a guard is very good, very good. Okay, so he also played in the Australian National Basketball League. He played for the Tasmania Jack Jumpers. I love the names of these teams, the Jack Jumpers. And he won a championship with the Jack Jumpers. Well, there you go. See, he, apparently he's a proven winner, and he has facts to back that up. And then he's also been a member of the New Zealand national team since 2022. That's also very impressive. So the New Zealand national team is, that's the equivalent of our Team USA with LeBron, Curry, Durant, and those guys. So he's on the New Zealand version of that team, which I don't care if New Zealand's basketball is, pretty low compared to USA. It's still, to be one of the best players in the entire country, this guy's not going to suck. There's just no way. He's going to be good. He's going to be good if he's good enough to be a key member for the national team and 5 years of professional experience. So how good is the competition in New Zealand? I had to look that up, and it's what you would think. It doesn't compare to United States or the NBA. It doesn't compare to the top level pro leagues, but it's still solid, right? It's a good league, I guess, for players who are older and they want to keep playing, but they, want to keep making some money, but they're as good as they used to be. It's a good mix of players like that and also young up-and-coming players. Okay, there's a lot of players that start off in New Zealand at a young age playing professionally, starting when they're like 17, 18 years old, and then improving there, learning the game, the fundamentals, getting stronger, and then moving from there to higher level leagues. So New Zealand it's solid. Well, we'll just say that. It's good enough that, it's not like we're getting the best player in Zimbabwe. I'm trying to think of a random country. Something like that, Egypt or something. So yeah, all right. And let's talk about, because I keep getting asked this question, you could play professionally in other countries and then play college? Like, how does that work? How do you not lose your eligibility to play college ball if you've already played professionally? Because in the United States, it doesn't work that way. Okay, I mean, if you play 1 second of professional basketball in the United States, you can never play college, right? So I had to do a little bit of Googling, if you will, and to answer this question. But basically the answer is yes, international basketball players can play professionally overseas and then play college basketball in the U.S. However, they must meet specific NCAA amateurism requirements. So the NCAA has rules as far as how they govern amateurism. These rules are very complex, I guess you could say, in a lot of ways for international players. So they have something called actual and necessary expenses. And what this means is to maintain eligibility for college basketball, international players can only have received, quote, actual and necessary expenses, end quote. Okay, which means like lodging, travel, their meals from professional teams. So to my understanding, in order for him to be able to have the eligibility to play college basketball, he was only able to receive like living expenses and traveling and food, right? If he was getting big, massive paychecks on top of that, then he wouldn't be eligible, okay? So that kind of makes sense, right? And then there are some other potential issues that international players coming to the U.S. have to deal with. For example, if a player has been paid significantly more than just expenses, or they signed a contract with a professional team, they may not be eligible for college basketball. So even though they're playing professionally, they still have amateur status because they're not signing contracts, they don't have agents, they're not receiving big paychecks. Okay, so hopefully that's making a little bit of sense. Uh, Also, immigration, international students coming to play in the United States to play college, they also need to navigate the different immigration laws, which include student visas. And then one thing I was curious about was how this is impacted by NIL. So NIL can get a little weird when it comes to international players. It can get confusing, right? So the NCAA's NIL rules have also added another layer of complexity on top of it, right? For these international players, because they may have restrictions on how they earn money while they are currently on a student visa. Okay. So hopefully that answers the question of how he's able to play college basketball. One question I did not get answered is, why is he a senior? I don't know. I couldn't find the answer to that question. If anyone knows, let me know. I don't know. It might have something to do with his age or how many years after high school. I don't even know if they call it high school in New Zealand. They might call it something else. But I think that's the reason, right? It has something to do with how many years since he was a senior in high school, whatever they call that there. That would be my guess, right? So, but yeah, we get this guy for 1 year. Now let's talk about his skill set. Like I said, I watched every second of every video I could find on him. And what I gathered is he's a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. So we have some guys on this team that can pass and get to the rim and kick out. So I think he'll do really well in this offense. I'm telling you right now, this Rebel team is going to shoot a lot of threes this upcoming season. I know he will, because we have so many players on this team that can shoot. So why not take advantage of that? So that's why I think Walter's going to fit perfectly in that sense. So yeah, he's a good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I think he could improve on shooting off the dribble. I think making the transition over to the United States, he's going to play against longer, more athletic players than he's used to, more talented players than he's used to. So he's going to have to make some adjustments, like as far as like getting his shot off quick or adding new moves to his repertoire. Okay. Passing, he averaged 2 assists per game. Good, not great. But this is a guy that can make plays. Now, I don't see him as a guy who's going to go out there and just throw some stupid passes. Like, dude, what were you thinking? Like, what was that? You know, those passes that just, they're so frustrating as a fan, because it's like he had no chance of even catching that. I think this dude is going to be a smart player, and he's going to make the right pass. Okay, there's a difference between, you know, like your Chris Paul, Luka Doncic type of guys who can just make these Nikola Jokic, who can just make these unbelievable passes. Like how did you see him open, right? Like, do you have eyes in the back of your head? So he's not going to be like that kind of passer. He's just going to make the right play. Okay, knowing when to make the extra pass, knowing when, you see a defense collapsing on you, your vision of the entire half court, scanning the court to see which player is open. I think he's going to be very solid in that sense. Okay. Defense, one thing that they don't have a lot of defense in highlight tapes, but from the research I did on him and a lot of stuff that I read about him is he's a very gritty defender. Okay. So he's not that type of defensive player who just has the tools and they don't use it. Like he doesn't have a super long wingspan, to my understanding. He's not super quick laterally, but he's going to be someone that gets under your skin. He's strong. This is one thing I really, really learned about basketball is like, you think defense is going to completely have to do with, length and athleticism, but no, it's so much more complex than that. Like, my best friend wasn't the most athletic player ever, but he was a very good defender because he just knew how to use physicality and his hips and positioning and little strategies and techniques to frustrate the offensive player and lock them up. And I think that's the type of defensive player that Walter Brown is. So definitely excited to see that in action and also to see how it translates to a completely different level of competition. Now, that brings me to the next question I want to talk about, and that is how will he do transitioning from professional basketball in New Zealand to playing college basketball in NCAA to go into the Mountain West Conference? Well, the way I see it is we're not getting some freshman, 18-year-old who's only used to playing AAU ball or playing for his high school team, and he's skinny and raw, and he's going against, now he has to go against players that have been in the weight room for several years. We're getting someone who has been playing basketball against grown ass men for 5 years. Someone who plays internationally, and we all know international players, it's all about fundamentals, right? So we're getting someone who's been taught the game the right way, someone who's been in the weight room, and someone who's growing into that grown man body, right? And who's also gone against grown men. So if you go look at the footage of Walter Brown, you look at the competition, you look at who he's playing against, those are not kids out there. Those are not little skinny dudes out there. There's some big, big boys out there on that court. 7-footers, muscular, strong, tough. I mean, these are guys who are playing for contracts. So these aren't like just pathetic players he's going against. So I think all that experience, like, I think he will do just fine in the NCAA. It will be an adjustment because he's going to be going against better athletes than he's probably used to seeing. But I think he will be just fine, right? And speaking of athlete, this is another thing I want to talk about. He's a sneaky athletic player, okay? And what I mean by sneaky athletic player is you don't think of him as a good athlete. You don't draw up plays to throw him a lob, or he's not gonna make the crowd jump to their feet and by doing some spectacular dunk on a fast break. No, but he just like does things that were like, oh, dang, I didn't know he could do that. So there's a lot of highlights of him blocking someone's shot, like coming from the weak side help or on a fast break, gathering himself, and he can get off the floor, right? And then I saw some dunks where he cocked it back pretty far behind his head. And again, he's 6'5". Who knows what his actual height is barefoot? But he's 6'5", I think around 215. He's got a nice little build to him. And he's not unathletic either. I think for a college basketball player, he's going to be average at worst, which is still pretty good. So last thing I'll talk about, and then I will wrap this thing up. How will he fit on this team? That's a very good question. I don't know much about his personality. There's a lot to wonder when it comes to that. I don't know. From everything I've read, he's a great teammate, so I'm not too concerned about that. But, sometimes you don't know how these things mesh. We're pretty stacked right now at the wing position. We have a lot of players that can play the shooting guard to like stretch 4 in that range. So there's going to be a lot of competition for playing time. And it's really hard to predict how good Walter Brown is going to be. My brother, for example, he watched Walter Brown's highlights and he goes, dude, I don't know. He could be UNLV's best player or sit the bench. It's that hard to tell. And that was my same assessment. So I do think he's going to be better than people think. I think he's coming in with not super high expectations. I can't say for certainty that I think he's going to be a starter, but I can say with confidence he will very much so be in the rotation. What I think it honestly will come down is these freak athlete talents we have, like Tyron Jones and Nazir Cunningham, the guys that have all this NBA talent. How good they are will play a major factor in if we're going to see if Walter Brown can sneak into the starting lineup or get big minutes, because those guys obviously have a higher ceiling than Walter. But Walter, again, is going to have such a leg up on them as far as experience and just years spent in the weight room. So I think his primary position will be small forward. He could potentially play the shooting guard in certain situations. He could potentially play the 4 in certain situations. But based on his size and everything I've witnessed from watching him play, I think we're getting a legit small forward. And he might actually be the favorite to start at the small forward position. I'm not going to get into my starting lineup right now. One, because I still don't know. But also, I'm going to do a whole episode on just that. All right, I'm excited for Walter Brown. I'm excited for this basketball season, Rebel fans. If you haven't checked out his highlights yet, go watch him. There's some really good ones. There's ones where he went off for 25 points in a game against professional competition, and he looked really good. Not gonna lie, he looked really good. Okay, until next time, Rebel fans.